All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Hausenblas and this is Cloud Native Development. Today we're gonna talk about Kubernetes extensibility, but before that, as usual, we're gonna have a quick look at some news items. So the first one here is a nice little tool, a pass, if you want to check that out. Um, should be interesting to run. It's nicely packaged with Docker and Traffic, and yeah, give it a try. There was a really well-written article by Capital One Engineering around container runtime comparison to a certain extent, a bit more about the background and what kind of OCI, Open Container Initiative, compatible runtimes are available. Some of them are not really active anymore, but you get a good idea of what is available in that space. If you are a gopher, if you're into Go, you might want to check out this opinionated article on the supposedly issue around Go version 2. This one is also quite nice around building an EKS cluster using Terraform. Terraform being a very popular way to provision, manage, upgrade EKS clusters. The next one here is again a relatively deep dive on container image signatures. The TLDR gives it away essentially around the Docker Content Trust, Notary, ongoing efforts, etc. Next up, we have a really nice contribution from the Cloudonauts. And that, if you're Kubernetes head, you probably recognize this idea of audit to RBAC. Essentially, you record the actual calls that are done, and with that, you can derive an IAM policy. Essentially, a good practice around establishing least privileges. Then we have a very nice contribution by the Kinfolks, Mauricio Vasquez here from Kinfolk, looking at benchmarking egress filtering in Linux, and the TLDR or the winner is actually not really PPF as you would guess, but yeah, have a read. It's really well done. I like it. And next up, you should really reserve some, I think, 45 minutes or so watching that video here. Cheryl did that. She's at CNCF, and this technology radar is a new format I accept. And this is really well done. So open source and CNCF in the wider sense offerings, and we know this kind of radar thing from other consultants and the likes, analysts. But the CNCF technology radar this time around for observability, really well done. And you have the folks who actually represent end users there in this video talking you through that. And last but not least, very recently, the good folks of Solo.io, to be specific, IDIT, there put forward this proposal, a way how to ship WASM applications using the OCI image spec to be precise. I think Steve from Azure pointed that out. It should be an artifact really, but I think the effort as such is very valid and very supportive of that. All right, and with that, we are getting to the topic of today, and that is Kubernetes extensibility. So, as you may know, um, Kubernetes itself is very extensible. And if you're not that familiar with what extensibility really means, there is an old deck that I gave a talk about that topic in end of 2018. Might want to check that out. I'm going to specifically focus on an extensibility mechanism in the control plane. So a way how you can make Kubernetes do things that it's not doing from its core resources. And the confusion that I see quite often is around these three terms here: core or built-in resources and custom resources, um, core controllers, so whatever you find in the controller manager in the kube control plane, or custom controllers, and operators. So let's take it one by one. If you look at the resources that Kubernetes, any given version really nowadays, ships with, you have your pods there, you have your deployments there, stateful sets, persistent volumes, etc., etc. These are all built-in resources that the controller manager, so technically each of these resources has a controller in there, Go routine if you wish, um, understands, right? So if you create a pod, then the controller, the pod controller will listen and say like, oh, I know what to do with the pod. Same is true for deployments, services, etc. Now, if you have a custom resource, so something that is not a core resource, you can define your own custom resource, and all that it really does is it stores that in etcd, right? API server will happily take that, store it in etcd, and you can say, let's say if the custom resource is called foo, you can say kubectl get foo, right? And will happily show you the foos that you've created. Now, up until the point where there's a custom controller that actually knows what to do with that foo resource, nothing really happens other than storing in etcd and you can retrieve it again. So custom controllers with custom resources are very often called operators. The operator concept itself was born at CoreOS before Red Hat acquired it. And Red Hat then ran with that. I know it because I used to work at that time there. And you know, that's fine. And I recently looked up in the Kubernetes core upstream docs, and turns out that operators also found its way into the docs. So I will not call it a marketing term. It is an official term now. But in a sense, you can think of an operator as a custom resource together with a custom controller or more custom controllers, more than one, and a set of good practices around that. So the question now is, can you have a custom controller for a core resource? And the answer is yes. Think of the use case where you say that every namespace that you create should have certain properties. It should have a limit range. It should have certain service account set, whatever. So you're dealing with core resources like namespaces, like pods, like whatever Kubernetes has, but you have a custom controller that automates something that you would otherwise do manually or outside of the Kubernetes control plane using, for example, Terraform. So it's perfectly okay and possible to write a custom controller using a couple of lines of shell script really that does something to core, to built-in resources. So you don't have to have custom resources, but in the context of operators, you typically, or you almost always have this combination of custom resources and custom controllers. Which leads me to the last point, pros and cons, and be careful for what you wish for. The point there is that nowadays it's super easy to write controllers and operators, right? If we, for example, look at CF, right, you will find that there are two incubating projects, I believe. The operator framework, right? And Kudo might already be. Let me see, where is Kudo? Kudo, there it is, right? So these are two examples of frameworks of tools that allow you to write operators, so custom controllers, custom resources, etc., in a very, very straightforward way. And with that, I essentially want to highlight that nowadays, and you find plenty of resources out there, everything from a Medium article to GitHub repositories, that allow you to write custom controllers, operators very, very easily. And to a certain extent, I'm guilty myself. I wrote a book programming Kubernetes with my esteemed, back then at Red Hat, my esteemed colleague Stefan Szymanski. And that essentially is about writing custom controllers and many more things using Go. But nowadays, you have many other ways. You have Python-based, Java-based. You have many ways how to write controllers. Kudo, for example, makes it so simple that you don't even have to write code, any code at all, but just with YAML configuration. But still, the challenge is, should you be writing it, right? Should you be creating a new controller, a new operator? And as every good answer, it starts with it depends, obviously. So there is the pro that you can automate any kind of workflow, right? So if you find yourself repeatedly doing X, Y, Z, for example, when you set up a namespace, when you set up a database, you migrate things, you back up things, or whatever, these things are really good candidates for custom controllers, right? You really want to automate that, and having all of that in one unified API in using the Kubernetes API is great, right? Whoever knows how to operate, no pun intended, kubectl can immediately get started with your custom resource there. On the other hand, this is also a commitment, right? If you write such a thing, if you write a custom controller, if you invent custom resources, then there is an expectation by your users, think of in an enterprise or open source, that you keep investing, right? You need to make sure that these custom controllers play nicely with others in the cluster. You need to make sure that they scale. You need to security patch them, etc., etc. So there is there are certain costs that come with that, and as long as you're willing to invest that, as long as you're happy, to accept that it's not a one shot, it's not just initiating it and putting it somewhere and making it available, but really a continuous effort to keep it up and to extend it and to incorporate any user requirements going forward. That's perfectly fine, right? I definitely encourage you to look at that. So, summarizing the Kubernetes extensibility, Kubernetes is very extensible. One super popular way these days is, in fact, custom resources, custom controllers, or operators, if you like. And, definitely have a look at that. Consider it for your use case. Any kind of automation, be it core resources, think of namespaces, persistent volumes, stateful sets, deployments, what have you, or going even further, coming up with your own custom resources and custom controller together along with that. But be aware of that this is a commitment, and you do need to commit and treat it like any other piece of software that you put out there. So it's not a one-shot operation. Okay, that was it for today. Next time I'm considering doing something around OCI artifacts. Unless you have a better or another suggestion, I'm open to having a look at other things. But I want to get back to doing something hands-on again, whatever we can get done in 15 to 20 minutes. Also happy to review any kind of open source project if you want me to, as long as it is somewhere in the scope of cloud native development. All right, and with that, thank you very much for dropping by. If you have any questions, leave me a comment or hit me up on via the website, and hope to see you around. Thank you. Bye.